is a beautiful mess. A beautiful mess, yeah. Life is a beautiful mess. A beautiful mess, yes. Life is a beautiful mess. A beautiful mess. I'm trying, I'm crying, I feel like I'm dying. I'm doing my best.
So welcome back to Being Human and Other Shit. I am Melissa. We have Stacy. And today I am recording from the ancestral homelands of the Miwok people, and I acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. And today we are super excited to have Veronica. Stacy, did you want to introduce Veronica?
This is my cousin. I feel like I'm gonna say that a million times. So many. But yeah, we're super stoked to have her on. We actually were saying like, damn, we're like low-key intimidated a little bit because she's so damn smart. And we're like, this is like shit we talk about, but on another level. So we're so ready for you to like educate us. I'm super excited, besides, you know, obviously us having the same bloodline, but you being like a good example of exactly what I consider to be like a boss bitch, right? Like just like our other cousin we interviewed, like mom, wife, beautiful, educated, and ready to like take down the world. So we're pumped, and we're gonna get just right into it like we normally do. Like if you want to go into your background. Oh,
first,
sorry.
The topic for today, actually, what Veronica's on here for. So it's Veronica
That's a good thing to say.
Gonzalez, yes. And she's going to be discussing her work on women of color in the incarceration system, and then with a focus on Latinas, right? Okay, perfect. So yeah, sorry, Stace, to interrupt that.
No, you're good.
I just want to make sure we were good on that. And then yeah, if you want to just jump into your background, that'd be awesome.
Okay. So like a little bit about me, or what do we do?
We always tell people like whatever you, as deep as you want to go. Like if you feel like your background growing up, you know, is gonna impact like what you're talking about today, like get into it. Whatever you have free reign.
Okay. Okay. I'm like, where do I start? That's like, I'll get into it, but like part of like what I do is like interviewing people, and I ask people like, can you tell me about your life story, right? And what I've learned over the years is that that's being able to have like a well-crafted sort of narrative of your own life is such a privilege, and it shouldn't be, but I think having the time and space to be able to reflect, having the tools that you need to articulate the sort of well-crafted narrative isn't accessible to everybody, especially if you come from a background where it's just about surviving. When you're in survival mode, like you don't have the time or space to like reflect. And then for me personally, because that came up a lot in like the interviews with formerly incarcerated and system impacted women that I did, a lot of them had a hard time articulating that kind of narrative. And I struggle too. And I think it's probably been in just like the last year or two that I've had to like force myself to craft this sort of narrative. And it's been through my job that I had to do that, because like applying for like grants and fellowships and for jobs, you have to have the sort of like personal background statement. But even then, like that's my life centered around my identity as a student, and sort of like my educational trajectory. So I mean, it's hard. I'll try. So my name is Veronica Lerma-Gonzalez. I am 35. I'm born and raised in Lodi, California, but I moved to Merced 8 years ago, almost 9 years ago, because I'm in a PhD program in sociology at UC Merced. Yeah, so I'll be finishing in May, and then I'll start my position as an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology at UC Davis.
Yeah.
Super excited about that. It's the end. It feels like the end of like a long ass journey and the beginning of another chapter. So I'm really excited about that.
Well, in that time, you've got married and had a baby.
Yeah. So I'm a mom, relatively new mom. My daughter is 1. Me and my partner have been married for almost 3 years, but we've been together for 10 years. What else? I could talk a little bit about my childhood. I'm the only girl. I have 5 brothers. 2 of them have passed away. But I mean, I guess like you, Stacy, I'm not sure about you, Melissa, but I grew up as the child of an addict. And so dealt with all of those things that come with living in a house with an addict. was very like chaotic. It was very traumatic, violent, all of those things. And so, yeah, that was sort of like my childhood. It was rough. Things came to a head when I was like 15, 16. I'm like going to be careful with what I share because some of this isn't like my place to share, but I will say that something happened and it became pretty public, like within our family. Like, so that was like a time where people suddenly knew that like my dad had this huge problem. I think everybody did know, but they didn't know sort of like what a monster he was at that time at home and stuff. And so a lot of this stuff came out about my family. And so, something that you said in your episode, Stacey, when you were talking with like Vince about your experiences with your dad, is you talked about being sort of like resentful or angry at certain people in y'all's family who sort of like enabled that behavior, right? And I really resonated with that feeling because, you know, around this time, everybody's like coming up to us like, hey, we had no clue. And I'm like, fuck you. Like,
Yeah.
you were
How
drinking
do you
with
not
him.
know?
Yeah. So I really, that episode really like resonated with me. And I told you like personally, I thought that it was just such a powerful episode. I've had other people in our family listen to it because I really feel like you and Vince gave voice to like an entire generation of cousins in our family.
Wow,
right?
thank you for saying that.
Yeah, because all our dads were like partying together, right?
Yeah,
It was a party for them, right? But it wasn't for like the kids and the wives at home.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, my dad, like things like got really bad for him. He almost died. And that was sort of like his turning point. And he went away to get clean and sober and completely like turned his life around. But I was like not in a space where I wanted to like continue any kind of relationship with him. But my mom took him back, and I was just so angry at that point at everybody, at the world. And so I think I just like sort of exploded. I was very rebellious as a teenager. I was into drugs at that point. And I got kicked out of school. I was out of high school for almost a year until I was enrolled in a continuation school it was through like an independent study program in Stockton. And so I graduated, Plaza Robles in Stockton. So I graduated there in 2004, and I wasn't really sure like what it was that I wanted to do. And so I just decided to like take some time off to like figure out what it is I wanted. I was always like really good at school. And even when I was like in the streets, even when I wasn't in school, I was still like going to the library and checking out books and like wanting to read. I loved reading. I loved learning about different things. And I was just like good at school. And so I decided to take some time off. And in that time, my older brother passed away. And that was like a pretty significant life event that I think that changed everything for me. And whereas before, where I kind of like sort of just partied and dabbled with drugs, and I was doing like hard drugs back then, like when I was 15 and 16, but after he died, it just became a problem. And so I was like deep in my addiction for a lot of years, and spent just as long, if not longer, like on the wagon, off the wagon, you know, trying to get clean. And so, yeah, some of like what I lived as a child, like I just kind of like continued as a teenager and early adult. And then so after a few years after my brother died, I started going to Delta, just like taking classes and stuff. And I always knew what I wanted to do. I always knew that I was interested in sociology, and I always thought that I would just be a social worker. And so I'd go to Delta and take like sociology classes, but I was still like trying to do like my own thing. I was still on drugs and stuff. And so I would just like stop going to school. And that happened that was going on for a few years. So I had like hella Fs on my transcript. Like I would never like formally unenroll. Like I would just stop going. And then eventually, maybe when I was like 23 or 24, I just like decided to take it more seriously. And you know, I was at Delta for so long. I was at Delta for like 6 years. And I like talked to a guidance counselor and she was like, you have like 6 AAs, like you need to go.
You're done here.
Yeah.
We actually can allow you to come back.
Yeah.
You've maxed out on AAs at this point.
Yeah. And I didn't know. And Delta's a really, really good school.
Yeah.
It's like top rank in the state, but it's also, and maybe this is true for like all community colleges, I don't know, but it's very easy to get lost in the community college system, particularly at Delta. And so I was just taking class, like I didn't have any sort of like guidance on, I didn't know that I had 6 AAs. Like I just kept going. They told me to take these classes and I would take them. And so this counselor was like, you can transfer now. So yeah.
Spread your wings, baby.
My job.
Yeah. So I had planned on going to Sac State. And she was like, I think you qualify for an academic scholarship through UOP. And so I applied and I got it. And so I was a transfer student. I was at UOP for 2 years. But I was still kind of like, I'm going to be a social worker. And my plan was to transfer to Sac State to be in a master's program for social work. And my advisor at UOP was like, well, just like reading like your work and reading like your some of like the statements that I had to write to enter into that program. She was like, it sounds like you're interested in research and you're really good at writing. And have you ever thought about a PhD program? And I was like, no. And she was like, well, I would encourage you to think about it. And I was like, well, yeah, like maybe after I've worked as a social worker for a couple of years, like maybe that's something that I could do. And she was like, she really like broke down the process to me and was like, a PhD program costs less than a master's program. And if it's not for you, you can stop at the master's along the way to the PhD program, if that's the way the PhD program is set up. And then you don't have all this debt for getting a master's. They call it mastering out. Yeah. And so I was like the thought of like getting a PhD was like, I never even thought about that. I didn't think I was smart enough to do that. I didn't know anybody that had PhDs. I didn't know anybody really that went to college.
Yeah. So this in and of itself is super impressive. Like this is super impressive. So I mean, thank you for sharing this. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm just impressed by that whole.
Yeah, and when I do feel like that is something that you feel, like I definitely feel like that's something I can relate to when people like specifically, I always say like Vince and my sister Amanda are the smartest in our family. Mm-hmm. And they're both not college educated. And when they'll say stuff like, we're not like you, I'm like, you guys don't, I feel like you don't know how dumb I actually am. I'm determined. I always say that, like sometimes with college, you always are like, oh my God, the smartest people have degrees with like, yes, obviously, yes, you can't be like not care at all. But a lot of it is being driven. And I felt that way. Like, I'm not smart enough to get my master's. I'm not smart enough to blah, blah, blah. And then these opportunities come and I'm like, oh shit, like I'm doing this,
Yeah. That's I mean, I think I still struggle with like imposter syndrome and stuff, but growing up, like it was my brother Richard that was like brilliant. Like he was actually gifted. He was in GATE. And with me, people really assume like, oh, she must be really smart. But like when I read something, I have to read it like 5 times just for it to click. Like for me, it takes a lot longer. And I completely agree with you. I think it's like, it's not really about like smarts. It's like, how hard are you willing to work to get these degrees, right? And so, so I'm like, I have no clue how to apply to like PhD programs. And I didn't know the difference at the time between like UCs and CSUs. And my advisor had encouraged me to look at PhD programs in the UC system. So I'm like looking, and all of like their deadlines are past. And I'm like, well, I guess I have to like wait till next year. And then I saw UC Merced, and I don't even know that I knew of UC Merced at that point. And it was the first year that their sociology department was admitting PhD students. So any student that was admitted that year would be a part of like the founding cohort. And so like for anybody listening that doesn't have like sort of like the knowledge of how like this works, typically people prepare for like a year in advance, applying to like PhD programs, working on their statements, preparing for different exams that they might have to take to enter into these programs. I did everything in 2 days. And
Wow.
yeah, and then I got in. Yeah, so I'm a part of like the first cohort of PhD students in sociology at UC Merced. And I mean, I guess this is sort of like leads into like my work. So if like you want me to start talking about, okay. So I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, like what I wanted to research, what I was like interested in. I knew I was interested in race. I knew I was interested in gender, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do with that. And I became a research assistant for a sociologist who's pretty renowned for her work in the 70s and 80s on Chicano gang members. And she introduced me to criminalization research. And I was just so, like, I just thought I was so moved by that, that scholarship, that body of work. And I really identified with it because I'll first start with what I mean by criminalization, because I think it's one of those words that like people think they know, like there's different definitions, but in my own work, I borrow a definition that was offered by a sociologist by the name of Victor Rios, and he defined criminalization as the process by which styles and behaviors are rendered deviant and treated with shame, exclusion, punishment, and incarceration. That's probably like an exact like definition too. I've had to say it so many times, but what's really like key about that definition is like nowhere in that definition is there any reference to committing a crime, because you don't have to commit a crime or break the law to become criminalized, right? Like just belonging to a certain group, looking a certain way is enough to like merit criminalization. So I was
like the police pulling gang members over and taking pictures of their tattoos and all this stuff that we didn't realize in the 80s and 90s was not, you can't just take a 13-year-old kid off the street that you deem a gang member and take pictures to, you know, put them in a reference file. Right. So belonging to a particular like racial or ethnic group, having a shaved head, wearing a white tee, having like Cortezes, right? Having winged eyeliner and big hoops, all of those things, right? So so I was like just really I think I like identified so much with that scholarship because it was something that I experienced in my own life, that I witnessed women in our family go through, right? My friends at school, people in my community, but I didn't know there was like a name for it. And so like being introduced to this research that was really critical of the criminal legal system, right? And didn't assign blame to individual people or racial or ethnic groups, right? Like took a more structural sort of like approach to understanding this process. And that's what it is the criminalization is an ongoing process. Another like key feature that I really try to highlight in my work about criminalization is that it's multi-spatial. So it's not just happening within the criminal legal system, it happens in schools, right? It happens in our communities, it happens in the social service sector, it can happen within families. So it exists everywhere. So somebody who's criminalized, they experience it in almost all of their institutional encounters, right? Even at home too, sometimes. So I was just really drawn to this research, but what struck me is that all of this research that I was reading highlighted the experiences of men and boys of color. I wasn't like really seeing any studies that highlighted the experiences of women and girls of color. And
and I won't get into like theoretical motivations or anything, but part of the reason why that's the case is because criminalization is viewed as a racialized project. Like it's seen as like a system of racial control, reproduces racial inequities, right? Which is true, and I agree with, but there's also other systems at play too. So my work is more intersectional, and I look at gender and sexuality as well as race in my own work. So yeah, that's like what led me to the current work that I do. I study formerly incarcerated and system impacted Mexican American women who live in the Central Valley. And system impacted references people who have been indirectly impacted by the criminal justice system. So usually through the incarceration of a close loved one, so like a parent, sibling, spouse.
Yeah.
It can also include folks that have been arrested and convicted, but they just were never sentenced to any like time for it. So somebody that got probation and not jail time or whatever. So yeah, that's sort of like what brought me to like what I do. That's like a very long-winded.
No, that was thoroughly explained. I love that. Like I do. It's weird when we were talking about. I remember seeing that. I guess it was a documentary or a miniseries, We Are Monsters.
Oh yeah.
And I remember even thinking, as much as I really loved it, thinking at the time, like women still always play like side characters, or like, you know, there's never a lot of like main character women, especially in our community, where a lot of it is what you see is like these like cholo girls holding their men down.
Yeah.
They don't really show, you know, what has gotten them to where they are.
Yeah.
And the impact after. So yeah, that was a really good you explained it so thoroughly. I love that.
Well, and I won't get like super in depth, but like sort of what my dissertation is organized around is like 3 key mechanisms by which Chicanas are like criminalized that are different from like Chicano men and boys. And so one of those is through their relationships with Latino men, that Latinos are criminalized through their relationships with Latino men, family members, friends, heterosexual partners, if they have them, right? And so it's really like you were saying, these stereotypes and these assumptions and expectations that Latinas are submissive and that they're down for their men, that they'll do anything for their men, including like supporting assumed criminal behavior, right? Yeah, so that's something that I explore as well in my research. Motherhood and sexuality are also like key mechanisms that really sort of influence the criminalization process. And then also life histories of like violence and victimization too, that really sets these like sort of trajectories apart from men and boys.
Yeah.
So
what do you feel like? Oh, go ahead, Melissa. I know, I feel like I've been taking it off.
No, go. You go.
I lost it now, so you go.
Okay. So I was going to ask if you can kind of just talk through some of maybe the specific programs that exist once they're out of the system.
Yeah. So there's not much. That's why I was really like hoping that we would talk about this, because there's not shit here that is gender specific, is like culturally relevant or responsive. And what exists, like, it's not great for like men and boys like either, but what exists is typically designed for like a male clientele. So there's not like a lot of like resources to support these really unique needs, right, of like formerly incarcerated and system impacted women and girls. And so like my future work, I really situate my work in this regional context of the Central Valley. And I argue that criminalization happens everywhere, right? And a lot of the studies that I was so like inspired by, that inspired my own work, there's studies that are done in Oakland, in East LA, in Philadelphia, in New York. But there's none really that look at a more rural kind of like agricultural context. And the Central Valley, I think, is a place that it's only if you live here that you understand how unique it is. And I actually argue that criminalization looks worse in the Central Valley because it's the Central Valley. Because, you know, like for folks that don't know, the Central Valley is referred to usually by others that don't live here as Prison Alley. And that's because in the 1980s, there was this large scale statewide prison building project, and most of those prisons are here in the Central Valley. And so there's a scholar who, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, and she argues that prisons in California were offered as sort of like the solution to certain problems in surplus. And one of those problems was surplus land. And so the Central Valley sort of like solved the problem of where to put prisons, because we had all this unused agricultural land. That's part of it. Like, that's not the only reason. And she also argues, like in a different paper, that the Central Valley is a place where all of society's undesirable elements come, right? Everything bad comes here: prisons, pollution, toxic incinerators. And that's because of like who lives here, right? Like, this is a very like racial and socioeconomically like marginalized place. And it's also a very important place too. Like, this is a place that grows more than half of this country's fruits, nuts, and vegetables, right? Like, the rest of the country and a lot of the world relies on the production that happens here. But it's also this place of like extreme like inequity too. And so yeah, like coming back to like resources, like I would argue that criminalization looks worse in the Central Valley because we don't have anything that like any institutionalized supports to resist criminalization and to resist the carceral system. It's just a very punitive like place without any sort of like these resources or supports to like combat that. So yeah, like to answer like the question, there's not shit here, and we need more stuff here. And for everybody too, like talking about like men and boys and women and girls is a very like binary way of thinking about gender, but we don't have any sort of like gender or culturally responsive supports here.
I think this is a super important conversation, because if you don't know that, you're just going, we're just living our lives. I didn't know that there were no resources, and I live in the Central Valley, but I'm also not part of that group of people. So it's I think it's important that we have these conversations so that we can hopefully work together to solve some of these problems.
The only thing I ever see like resources wise for women, period, it's always domestic violence. It's always domestic violence, you know, like groups. And there's so many, not like there should ever be a cap, but I'm like, you know, women go through more than that. It's not always just, you know, being in an abusive relationship, you know, which, I mean, it's like every episode that could snowball into like the resources just from jump of women that are allowing themselves to be in these abusive relationships, or people that are allowing themselves to be in these relationships. It's always the resources are lacking somewhere, but that is crazy that there's nothing.
So there's also something called post-incarceration syndrome, right? Is that a thing?
I'm not sure.
Okay. I was Googling like what existed after, and it was, that came up, and it just is a list of all the stuff that I would imagine you're going to cover, which is like, they come out with mental health issues and an array of, you know, anxiety, depression, things that I'm sure is, how could you not? When you're coming out and there's limited, I mean, can you even talk about like, is there even like housing, employment? Like, how does that even, where do they even start?
That's like, that's the problem. I think that the supports that do exist are largely tied to the criminal justice system, which is super problematic. And also you have to like meet certain criteria. And so like, they're not accessible. Also, like the Central Valley is like geographically a very like isolated region, right? And we don't have like this mass sort of transit system that connects like all, maybe more in like SAC, but not like more like in San Joaquin, South Valley, right? We don't have that. So maybe there's a program in Stockton, but how does somebody from Lodi get there when they don't have a car, right? Or if you're in Merced, like maybe there's a program in Fresno, but how do I get there, right? And so, and I think like there isn't any sort of like supports for like post incarceration, but even thinking like earlier than that, right? There isn't really like community level supports for women and girls of color before like one would enter into the system, right? Like the reason why I study women that do have experience with incarceration and women that don't is because it shows that it doesn't matter, right? They were still experiencing this hyper policing, whether they had a record or not, right? And there are no supports to help girls, right? And boys of color. And so, yeah, I think that we need to think of it like more like the bigger picture and not just like supporting folks after incarceration, like, but before as well. But yeah, like part of, I mean, like the post-incarceration syndrome, like that sounds like something like that exists, right? But I don't really,
I'm like, I don't know enough about it. I just,
yeah,
like, it was something that came up.
Yeah, like, I mean, I don't like study like crime or incarceration like per se, but there's so many problems that are just exacerbated by incarceration, right? That like so much like violence that the state inflicts on people. Prisons don't do shit, and there's nothing to like really help them unless you have like sort of like that family or community support, which not many people do, or like you're very fortunate if you do. So yeah.
I've said this actually multiple times because I think that people like growing up, without, people don't, my mom has been in food bank lines, and at one point in her life before she educated herself was on welfare and WIC and food stamps and had to do all these, like we have an old school food stamps, you had to pull out the book and like count out, we didn't have that like cool EBT card, but like, I think that people don't realize when you're trying to get Medi-Cal and WIC and cash aid and, you don't have a car and it's yes, the resources are there, because I always hear that from like the Facebook judges on, with the gavel and their opinions, like there's all these resources out there, like blah, blah. It's like, dude, it's not as easy as you think it is.
Yeah.
It's time consuming. It's not set up for any type of convenience. And that's the thing I hear. Well, it's like, well, if you want, I'm going to work every day, and if you want these resources, it doesn't have to be hard for people. It shouldn't be hard, because that's another form of punishment. Let me make this like 10 extra hoops for you to jump through to like be to step 1 so that you could get to step 2. And a lot of people don't understand that. I actually have a cousin that I gave this like whole speech to, he talking about having a family and a support system, like even in my own family, we have my mom who has been so supportive and has picked everybody up in every way, even financially when she's had to. And I say that if mom didn't have a car, you could drive to go see your kids at your visits, or go to a meeting and watch your kids while you go, to an NA meeting. What would you do? There's parents that are in the CPS system and their kids are, they have to go do all these different types of steps to be able to get their kids back, and they have no way of getting there. They have no car, they have nothing. The bus, you're right, SAC has light rail. Lodi, Stockton, all the Central Valley, there's no type of convenient system at all to be able to get around. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do feel like we've talked about that before, where I'm like, yeah, it's not always just super like black and white. There are a lot of different steps that try to take people to get to those points, and it's really challenging.
Well, we have people going into the system with little or nothing, and then coming out with even less than that. And so I'd imagine also a high percentage of, women and girls of color, like having their support systems also being in the system. Do you see a high percentage of that as well?
Yeah, there's so much overlap between like these two samples that I study. Like all of the formerly incarcerated women that I studied were also system impacted when they were growing up, because they had like a parent or a sibling that was incarcerated. And so it's like this sort of like intergenerational transfer of like oppression, right? That just like keeps going, which is why I say that having support services that are tied to the criminal legal system is so fucking problematic. and that this criminalization cycle just like it just continues, right? Even in schools are so like, we can talk about like the prison or the school to prison pipeline, like schools are so intimately like weaved now with the carceral system, as is welfare, as is the family court system, right? And so, yeah, it's super problematic. And I really love that that part of y'all's platform is really like destigmatizing like mental health, right? And that's huge. That comes up in my interviews with these women. But we also need to talk about access too, right? It's so hard to get mental health supports here. And I know that because I've tried like here, a few times, but like, so I had my daughter a year ago, and earlier this year I was like really struggling. And we can also talk about the pandemic too. That's made everything like harder to access. But like I have insurance. I have a little bit of money, like not much, but I have like those sort of like that sort of like capital available to me. But so like I go down the list of all of these like mental health providers that accept my insurance, and then I try to find someone that has like accessible hours, right? Because I'm the primary caregiver to my kid. Like, so I need somebody that's like accepts appointments after 5 or on weekends, and there is like nobody. And I have a car. I'm like, my job is a researcher. I know how to like research all this stuff. So I can't imagine people that don't have like sort of those resources at their disposal being able to find any sort of like support, right? So I think that the conversations over mental health also need to include like a structural component and talk about accessibility to these like sort of services, right?
Yeah, because
I 100% agree with that.
If you think of like all the folk, which I've known plenty of people on like state aid, and there is complete, I mean, no hate to any of those providers, but it's like it's shit, or they're booked out 6 months, and it's like someone would have already slit their fucking wrist by then. Like,
no, they're so impacted too, because Kate and I, my roommate, were actually just talking about this, because I told her like just today, I was like, man, I think I need to make an appointment. I've been feeling really stressed with the pandemic, obviously working at a public school, and feeling the same shit everybody's feeling, family stuff, blah blah blah. And I was like, it sucks because I love my therapist. She's like cool, like I feel like she's like my homegirl, where like we like chop it up. But in reality, like I've been in therapy 20 something years at this point. She's really just not doing a lot for me, because she's a Kaiser therapist, probably great at what she does, but she's so impacted. And then I feel like an asshole, because I'm like, I actually finally, when I got this list of 20 people, she was the only one accepting new clients. And I'm like, I have insurance, right? Same. I have a car, I have money, and I'm sitting here complaining about being able to have access to this, mental health tune-up that I really need. But at the same time, it's like, it's not necessarily helping, so it's like, I don't know about you guys, but I always kind of feel that like, obviously gratitude, but then guilt, because I'm like, this isn't enough for me. Then I'm like, what about these people who have nothing, like literally nothing? And you can't get anybody after 5. Shit, there's some days they don't even want to have appointments after 2. I'm like, I'm still working. I can't even meet with you at that point, Yeah, it's intense. It's that whole thing is crazy. We talk, Melissa and I actually talk about it a lot. We're like, there needs to be more resources available to women who just, I mean, some people have so many kids, they don't even have time to make a phone call. The whole system, tear down the whole system.
It is. It's like, how do you build that community around that? Whether it's like ride shares, whatever it is, like, how do we, that's where everyone's stuck, right? It's like, okay, then where do we start? So I love that you're doing the beginning pieces of that work, by trying to go all the way back to, okay, why are this group of people being criminalized for existing, for having this color skin, those color eyes, whatever, and living in that neighborhood. And so it's like, you don't even stand a chance already, and so you're already, we're just squirting dish soap on a freaking slippery ass floor for them, and they're just trying to like skate on by. And it's unfortunate. It's like, how do we utilize each other, lean on each other instead of the system that's failing everybody.
Yeah. And I think that like we've mentioned it a little bit, like there's like a care crisis nationally, right? Trying to have any sort of like or trying to get care for children, for maybe if you like take care of like your parents and stuff, it's super hard. It's also incredibly expensive. Like, why does paying for childcare cost more than like rent and mortgage, right? For one kid. Which is why I'm my kid's primary caregiver, right? And I'm doing a more than full-time job, but because we can't afford childcare. And so this like these narratives about like, you know, like get off like your lazy ass and go get a job or like whatever, like it is so, when I had my kid, and maybe I should have thought about this, but I wasn't really thinking, like I was just thinking about in terms of like finances, like can I afford to like feed my kid, clothe her, like can I pay for insurance? I can do all of that. I didn't consider that it would cost me almost $3,000 a month to have childcare, right? And then also during a pandemic, my kid's an infant, and so finding childcare for an infant who can't get vaccinated, who can't wear a mask, right? That's also incredibly hard as well. So yeah, I think all of these like systems like are linked, and they're so like vital and necessary to really resist sort of like institutionalized like oppression and criminalization, right? Like you can't access any sort of support systems if you don't have support like for your family, for like your kids. You can't access mental health support if like you need like childcare support too, right? Like, so they're all like connected. And like I mentioned earlier, I would argue that it's worse here than it is in other areas.
I agree. I mean, even yeah, like living in Sac, we definitely have, I mean, and I'm in like a Midtown area, there's definitely a lot more stuff around here that I see, you know, than like being from Lodi and partially from Stockton, and, you know, just seeing the impact stuff has there. And I think it like, I'm hoping that the like take it on the chin era is dying. That's what I'm hoping with the pandemic. And I think, you know, besides what we're trying to do, there's a lot of other people in our country, luckily, and what you're trying to do. Everybody's kind of trying to make a difference. I think that like age of just sitting back and allowing shit to happen around us is hopefully dying off. Hey, it's like, you know,
Budweiser sponsor.
Stella sponsor Melissa. This is actually her beer I'm drinking.
Mom, I'm drinking water, Mom. I'm not an alcoholic. Don't worry.
But yeah, I'm hoping that whole like take it on the chin era is dying, because it's like, dude, we got bigger pictures here. I just saw this like funny meme that was like boomer versus millennial, where it's like, I was able to buy a house at 20, you know, on working a 40-hour-a-week schedule, and it's like us, and it's like, dude, like that shit is over and gone. People are able to
your house cost $4,000 40 years ago.
Yeah, you paid that with 40,000 pennies. Like, chill out. That's not what it is anymore. Like, yeah, it's a totally different era, and that's why I'm happy like to have this conversation. It's also like for the BIPOC community, like it's our time. You know, like it's our time to speak up and like rally behind each other.
I think it's moving from intention. Stacey, I 100% agree with you. And you and I have talked about this endlessly, but it's like, okay, now you're right. There's all these people with like good intentions in the world, and we can say that confidently. It's just now we need to shift that intention into action and start doing some shit. Like start taking action, figuring out what we need to do collectively to change some of these things little by little, these little steps. And then the other thought I had when you were talking, Veronica, was also, if you think about like the BIPOC communities, you're talking about pre-incarceration, right? You're talking about families that culturally don't believe in mental health services. And so even if they had access to them, which they don't, we established that already, even if they had access to them, you're talking about a culture that is, you know, shies away from that or doesn't believe in it. Correct me if I'm speaking out of term on any of that, but
you're not at all.
Yeah, I agree. And that's like, it came up in a lot of like my interviews as well. Like there's such stigma particularly within Latinx communities, but it doesn't only exist within Latinx communities too, right? There's so many in social science research, there's so many like they call them deficit models that have been advanced based off of studies of Latinx families. Like if you've ever heard of like the culture of poverty, like argument, that's like that's based on a Mexican family. So I'm always like sort of like, well, that's true, right? We also, that's not really different from other cultures, or like also just like even US like culture 30 years ago, like that's also like a generational thing. But I mean, having these sort of like patriarchal, like machista sort of like ideologies, like certainly didn't help like my respondents, right? And I'm just always like sort of I don't ever want to like reproduce sort of the academic violence that's been inflicted on like my communities for like years, right? So I'm always like sort of like critical of some of these like explanations that like, which is why I'm like, I'm not interested in crime. I'm not interested in these bullshit explanations for why people commit crime, right? Like I look at like systems and structure. And so, but like totally agree, like that, like family is also an institution where a lot of like criminalization, intergenerational like traumas and oppressions get passed down. And in my work didn't really focus that much on family, but yeah, that's certainly there too.
What do you feel like there's a couple questions actually. One, I want to hear about some of the stories, if you are willing to even just tell some of, you know, like whatever you want to do, happy stories, kind of sad stories, whatever. And then also, how do you find people that are willing to talk to you? Like, is it just kind of a survey situation? Like, does UC Merced put out like emails? Like, how do you even get people to open up to you?
Yes, I'll start with that question first. So this part of the reason why I've been in graduate school for almost 9 years is because it's been so hard to do this study, to recruit people for this study. Not having like any help. I didn't have like help from my institution. Like it was all me. And that's part of why I say like the Central Valley. So I think it was made harder because of where we are. I couldn't like hang flyers at these different like support services because we don't have them, right? And so a lot of my recruitment, especially in the beginning, was like online recruitment, and I would just share like my research flyers like online, different like Facebook groups, and I would just be flooded with people just saying very hateful, racist, sexist stuff towards me, towards the people that I study, towards like potential like research volunteers, right? And like these flyers would have my information, so then I'd get like doxxed too, right? Like people like contacting me directly, and there was so much resistance to why anybody would want to study like Chicanas, right? Like, why are you studying that? And so if I posted my research flyer on like Lodi 411, right?
Don't even. You already know.
I can only imagine. I could only
like,
imagine.
Yeah, it's like build that wall, like Trump 2020. This was like a couple of years ago. Just really horrible things that I like. If you're somebody that qualified for the study and was like interested in it, and you're reading all of this bullshit directed at like people like you, like that obviously deterred, or I would think would deter anybody from wanting to participate in this kind of study. And it also was hard on me too, like just having to like take all of this on the chin and like, okay, like find another like Facebook page to post my flyers, and then same shit, right? And then I finally like started like not including my phone number, right? But I'd have like an email address. And it wasn't just like white people. There was plenty of like Spanish surnames too, right? Because people think that, if they are like multi-generational, if they're US born, that they're somehow, there's a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment within like Chicanx communities, right? Which explains why we have so many Trump supporting family members, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah, so so it's like a lot of that. There wasn't a lot of support at all. And even if it wasn't like that kind of vile like rhetoric, it was kind of like, why are you studying these people? Like you should be like people that don't have degrees, that aren't like researchers telling me what I should research. Like, why don't you study Latinos who are getting degrees? How come you're studying Latinas that are like fucked up and are in the system? Like, why are you shedding this kind of light on our people, right? And or yeah, but the men have it worse. How come you're not focused on the men? Like there is something about like the women that I study that people just really were angry about. So that made it like super hard. But I mean, I was very like fortunate to like get to talk to the people that like did want to be in my study, and almost all of them were like, we want things to change, and hoping that they're like this study and their involvement in the study could like contribute to that change. And so I'm just so indebted to them. I'm very like not trying to be like paternalistic in any way, but I'm also like very protective of them. And but I mean, like so many, I couldn't say like, well, there is like, I have one, well, a few, but like early on in my research, I was going to interview one woman and we were corresponding and stuff. And so I met up with her for our interview, and she was like, my homegirl just got out of prison like a few days ago. She wants to be interviewed too. And I was like, hell yeah. Like nobody just wants to, it's never been that easy. So I'm like, okay. And she was 21 and she had just finished doing like 3 years in prison, and but was in like juvie and YA before that. And so I have a chapter where I talk about criminalization through life histories of violence and victimization, and how interpersonal violence gets transformed into state violence when these institutions that are supposed to be supportive and helpful are just inflicting their own, like the police, right? Like schools are just kind of like inflicting their own sort of harm on these women. So this person, I'm trying to think of what her pseudonym is in my study. Smiley, I think I named her. She didn't have family. Her dad was like in and out of the system and didn't want to be in her life. Her mom was schizophrenic and also on drugs, and she was kicked out of her home when she was like 15. And so she went to her school. She was trying to get a worker's permit, and they were like, no, because like you get in fights too much, you get in trouble too much, you don't have the grades. And she was like, I'm homeless, I don't have money, like what the fuck am I supposed to do? And they were like, they weren't helpful. And so she was like, do I just drop out? Like she asked that to them, and they were like, if you drop out, like you're gonna get arrested, whatever. And so like normally, or what should happen is that these like mandated reporters should be investigating the situation more, should be offering help and support, but they didn't. And so she ended up dropping out of school. And the first time she was arrested was for armed robbery. And so she did her time for that. And then she was sort of like that, in and out of the system, doing stuff so she could survive on the streets, because she was like a 15, 16-year-old trying to survive in, Stockton. And when she was 18, she shot her rapist 9 times and he didn't die. And she went to prison for that. And so
I can't even.
Yeah. And I actually heard of her story before, because I remember somebody sharing like a news article about it, and there was just a bunch of comments about how like she wasn't raped, she was a hoe, and blah blah blah, she's lying, whatever. And so there was no like love for her, like like all of these like different like from her school, from the legal system, from her community, right? Like nobody showed her any kind of love or support. And then when she came home, she talks, I actually opened an article that I'm like writing, like she talks about coming home from the gym, and she is like, once she gets out of her car, a cop has her at gunpoint and is like, is your boyfriend shooting any guns out here? And not her, like, is your boyfriend shooting any guns out here? And that's kind of like her life. That's what she has to navigate every day. And I don't want to ever like fetishize like trauma or violence, but that, I mean, maybe shooting like your attacker 9 times is like extreme, but like everything else was actually really common among like the women that I interviewed. And at every stage, even when she asked for help, she never got it.
Yeah.
And we're talking about a kid. We're talking about a kid, a child.
A literal child.
And
yep.
a child that is relying on the adult folks around her, whether it's school, wherever, home, wherever. And we're just failing them from the very beginning.
And I'll tell you, as a public school teacher, like it took me a long time to actually start teaching at a public school just because of my experience I had. You know, I've been pretty open. I went to Lodi High, and that was probably some of the hardest years of my life. And I had a counselor who, she liked white girls. That was it. So, you know, and I'm half white, not saying I'm not half white, but she didn't like me. And I was that kid. I was fighting, I was drinking, I was doing all the bad shit, you know, and nothing to help me. I mean, literally told me that same shit. Like, you probably should just drop out. Like, you're not going to ever be anything. And I'm like, you look at me now, bitch.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, like there's
Stacey,
not
you still do that shit.
I'll rub it in everybody's face if I can. Like, I don't care. Because when you come from nothing and you get something, that shit means more than any piece of paper I have that has my name on it. You know, and I think our public school system, and I know some of it's, you know, a lot of being a teacher, I do think some teachers just, their caseload's too high and it's just what it is. But there are a lot of stuff that people look over, and I think bad kids like myself, it's just like, you're a bad kid. There's nothing that's ever gonna happen for you. That poor girl, like, I mean, that like breaks my heart.
Yeah, and that's like, I mean, I had similar experiences. Like, I think that's a very common sort of like they call them controlling images or stereotype that somehow being Latina is like antithetical to being a student, right? Like those two identities cannot exist, right? You're probably just going to get pregnant. So why invest in school? And why should I, as a teacher or counselor, administrator, whatever, invest in you when you're probably just going to drop out and have a bunch of babies, right? That's something that I confronted a lot. And I was always like a pretty stellar student. Like, I always got like really good grades. And I would notice, like, so I did come up against those sort of images, but when like teachers or other like peers, school personnel would be like, oh, like, you're not like the others, right? Like, seeing me wasn't like, didn't do anything to counter the ideas that they had of Latinas in their head. I was just more like the exception to the rule. Like,
you were just this outlier that they're like,
And I mean, we can talk about like internal racism, like, because they thought like saying that was a compliment. And at the time, me, 12 years old, 13 years old, thought it was a compliment too, right? That like, because I held those sort of same stereotypes of like brown women as well, because that's all you're told. That's all you see like in the media, right? Is that you're just
what we saw growing up, you know, there are a lot of stay-at-home moms and housewives in our own family that it's like, you know, my mom was a stay-at-home mom forever until she became a teacher. That's how Vince and I grew up seeing her. And I was told that a lot growing up too. Like, you're going to just get pregnant. My mom was a teen mom, you know, you're going to get pregnant young, like, just like your mom. I was like, okay, you know, so you do get that interracial stuff. That's like,
Yeah. And I would say that, like, I've been in school, I'm 35. I've been in school for a very, very long time. I don't think those like those sort of preconceived ideas ever go away. Like when I tell people what I do, they're like, what? Like, and it's like insulting, like the reaction that I get, right? Like, because I don't fit their idea of what like somebody with a PhD looks like. Even at
You're not
school,
like a dusty old bitch.
yeah. Well, like even at school, I've been stopped by like the campus PD, like, why are you parking over here? Like, why are you on this campus, right? And I'm like, because I go here and like, let me see your school. Like they don't believe me, right? Because I don't fit whatever like image that they have in their head. So I would say like it doesn't go away, right? Like I'm still like confronted with that. I know professors that are like also multiply marginalized that still deal with that as professors on their campuses, being stopped by like campus PD, not getting like the sort of respect that like maybe a white male professor would get in the classroom. So that's just something that you always have to like confront and like contend with, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Hopefully we can counter that by continuing, the work that you're doing and getting more women and girls in the same positions that you're in, because you had a similar background to the folks that you're helping. So I think that the more we can get these girls in a similar situation, the less we can just counter what people's already predisposed like ideas are of what someone getting their PhD should look like.
Yeah. And I think that like, because my the women that I interviewed were like so like open and honest and vulnerable with me, it really challenged me to like do the same, because I wasn't really like not that I hid anything, but I wasn't like really like forward with some of the things that I've experienced in my life, because I thought like, because I already confront so many of these like stereotypes and ideas, I thought that if they knew this about my past, like talking about like other academics, right? If they knew this about my past, then they'll treat me differently or like whatever. But my work has brought me not only in contact with like some of the women that I study, but also with scholars who are doing similar work, who are also from similar backgrounds, who are formerly incarcerated, right? I identify as system impacted, but who are formerly incarcerated, who have been in the streets, have been on drugs, right? And have really like used like those challenges, like they've kind of like taken back the power of like some of these like obstacles, right? And it's really like inspired me to do the same and to reclaim some of these experiences and some of like the things that I had to confront, and just to be open and honest about that, and being able to share that like with my respondents, which probably helped me gain like trust, right, and support. But I also like acknowledge that I'm hella privileged by comparison, right? I've had like a lot of educational capital, and I don't confront like the same sort of like life experiences that they do. Not all of them. I mean, there are a lot of like shared experiences, but I also recognize my privilege. I try to always do that. But yeah, it's really just seeing the folks that I've come in contact on this journey that have really like inspired me, and it's really been empowering for me, because I felt so alone doing this research, and then it wasn't until recently that I've come in contact with folks that are doing similar things, maybe with different communities, that are also just challenging these like oppressive systems in academia, and challenging other people's ideas of what an academic looks like or does, and really bringing like a critical lens. I think I made a huge mistake in the beginning by thinking that if you studied inequality, that meant that you were interested in like dismantling systems of oppression and like trying to contribute to change. And that's not the case. That's actually like probably rare. Like if you want to do that, like for some people, this is just a way for them to get a degree, to get a publication, to get tenure, right? They don't give a fuck about the communities that they study. Nope. And so that's something that like I always try to be very close and accessible to the communities that I study, and working with them, right? Like I like I said, I never want to like reproduce all of like the academic violence that's been inflicted, particularly on brown women. And so this is, I hope that I achieve that. It's a learning curve. I've made mistakes along the way, but
of course.
yeah, but
That's a part of it, you know, that is a big part of it. And I think I'm so interested kind of in your process, just like you know, obviously you like start by sharing some of your own story, kind of like you're doing with us to make them feel comfortable. It sounds like the first couple, like they were really wanting to share their testimony, which is in itself is so powerful.
Yeah.
You know, but like, what is the process besides like finding them?
Yeah, I think it probably depends on how like they came across my study. Like if it was online, they probably already saw what I looked like. But usually like if I'm meeting up with somebody that I haven't seen, they all like ask about my tattoos or something. And I've learned to be an open book with my respondents, and have shared different aspects. Before I wouldn't, like before I thought I could be like objective, like you just tell me about yourself. Like I didn't look at this process as at all being reciprocal. Like I was just extracting, and I didn't look at it that way in the beginning. But yeah, just sharing my experiences, which were very similar. And I think, like I said, that like helped with trust and established rapport. Like for researchers, like when you do interviews, you have very little time to like establish that sort of trust. Like and so I think like that helped. But like I said, I have privilege. I'm an insider, outsider. And so like, yeah, like women that were in recovery had a much easier time just opening up, because they've been able to develop like this sort of narrative about their lives through therapy, like one-on-one therapy, group therapy, church, like having these testimonies. And some had a harder time. And so it was more of a conversation and me opening up about myself and helping them get to a place where they felt comfortable to do the same with me.
Where can we find like some of your work?
So I have stuff that is under review for publication. I do have articles published, and I don't even know that like they can be accessed without like paying a fee. But if somebody's like interested in my work, they can email me and I'll send like a free PDF. But like social problems, the Journal or Sociology of Race and Ethnicity. You could also just like Google me. Google me.
Hey, we don't want to see no shit that came up when you were a kid. You better hope Google cleaned that out.
Yeah, like
never mind, don't Google me.
yeah, maybe don't Google me. But yeah, if anybody's interested in my work, I'd be happy to like share it, like if somebody wanted to contact me directly. But it is published in academic articles or journals, but it's super hard to access those if you're not already a member. So yeah,
I would love to include some of those when I was like, I already know where she's going with this. I would love if you're comfortable including some of those, because I do think like using any type of platform to spread your knowledge is so powerful, which is what you're already doing, you know, beyond educating yourself. Like it sounds like I love that you said like, yes, we come across this, right? As educators, there are people even in my field that are like, this is what they do, but they clock out and they don't give a shit, you know? And it's not just a boundary thing. It's more of a like, I'm making money. This is a safe job. I get summers off and then I go home. You know, it's really nice when you meet other educators that really are invested in their work. And I wish it was like that for everybody, but you know, just like every job, there's bad apples. So I would love to expose people to your work, you know, beyond just this podcast. I think that's where you're going, Melissa.
Yeah, if when we're done over the course of the next couple of days, if you could just shoot us an email with like some of the links, we'll put them in the YouTube like description. And that way, if people want to dig a little bit deeper or even sign up for some of those
journals,
I couldn't get that word out of my head. I lost it. But yeah, I think I just want to thank you too for your transparency and your vulnerability with us, and then also with the folks that you're interviewing and you know, with just the work that you're doing, because I think that's getting you further and getting us further collectively. And so, you know, stories are so powerful, and that's something that why Stacey and I are even doing this. We have to be okay being vulnerable, because there's other people experiencing this. It's very rare, if ever, that we're experiencing something that somebody else is not experiencing something similar to. So, I mean, you guys right out of the gate, I don't know if it was in the beginning of this or before we started recording, but like talking about how much even your own childhood overlapped. I mean, you guys are cousins, but then that same story is the story of a billion other little girls, you know. It's insane to me.
Yeah. And I mean, like I said, I really appreciate y'all's work on this podcast. I think it is awesome that you're like just inviting family and homies, right, to talk about like their own experiences, and I've really enjoyed. I've been listening since the beginning, so I've really enjoyed.
Thank you.
Or watching on YouTube.
yeah. She's a YouTuber.
Yeah.
A YouTuber. So I just had really like one more question-ish, and it was like, what are some of the like biggest inequalities that you see with BIPOC and non-BIPOC folks that are like post-incarceration?
I think that like yeah, if I'm just thinking about like my formerly incarcerated respondents, like it's like the punishment never ends, because like if they were mothers, they experience like family separation right when they were incarcerated, and then they have to go through the family court system, and I've heard like very like just horrible stories there. But I like that inequality, like maybe it looks different, maybe they're in a different space, but that punishment and that hyper surveillance never goes away, right? And I see these inequalities as being like the result of intersecting systems of oppression, right? It's not just like race, it's not just white supremacy, it's also like heteropatriarchy, right? It's capitalism, and all of these systems are converging onto these women that have like no structural support. And it's just like all of these institutions that we don't think of as being carceral are deeply implicated into the carceral system, right? These are very punitive institutions, and there's nothing that they have to like sort of like resist that, other than, and I don't want to downplay like the influence of like people power and community support, right? But we also need like material or like a structural support, right? And so like it just keeps happening, right? No matter where they go. And then these systems or these institutions exist to bring them back over here into confinement. Yeah.
And then we're talking about people that are already criminalized before they enter the system, and then they're in the system, they do their time just like anybody else, and then they're out and they're still criminalized, and if it just is exasperated, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, damn, this was so good.
I know.
Thank you so much, seriously.
Do you have anything else that you think is important to like share with anybody? I mean, you covered so much good, juicy stuff, and I'm so happy that you took the time to get on here with us.
Well, I mean, I really appreciate like the opportunity, especially being able to like talk about my work to like non-academic audiences, because that's where I see like my work is supposed to be like geared towards, right? But I'm just coming off of like sort of like the job market where I've just been talking about my work to other academics, so it's nice to share it to folks outside of academia.
Thanks for dumbing it down for us dum-dums.
Yeah, for real. I was like, oh.
No, yeah, I mean, I think like the major like take home messages we sort of like hit, you know, like criminalization is not the same as criminality, right? And that like all of these institutions are implicated into criminalizing folks, and for what? Like, because maybe this person had weed on it, like, you know, so I would just want people to think more critical about the institutions that they're embedded in, right? To think more critically about the criminal legal system and what it's actually doing, and what it's not doing. I come from like an abolitionist sort of perspective, I think we need to get rid of cops and prisons and jails, but we also need to dismantle these systems that are also very carceral in like their nature too. But yeah, I mean, I think that we've really like hit on the things that were important to me. And you know, that criminalization, like it's I think it's like it's very like insidious, right? It's something that folks like can't escape, and I think we all can play a part in helping to like resist that and to dismantle that.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I can speak for myself and Stacy. We look forward to like partnering with you in the future as we work, not even just on this podcast, but collectively to move from intention to action. And I think that, you know, you're going to be part of that, I'm sure, because you're amazing. So thank you so much. We appreciate you so much.
Love you, cuz.
Thank you.
Love you too. All right.
I love you both.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Yes, life is a beautiful mess. A beautiful mess.